The second knock came before Lin Yu reached the rifle. Slow. Certain. Not the frantic pounding of a traveler lost in bad weather. Not the blunt hammering of lawmen. This was worse. This was the kind of knock that meant the man outside already believed he would be answered. Outside, spring rain hissed against the roof of her cabin and ran in silver ropes down the porch posts. Lin Yu stepped away from the stove, where ginger broth still trembled in a blackened pot, and lifted the Spencer carbine her late husband had taught her to fire before he died. In the Salmon River country of Idaho Territory in 1884, a Chinese widow living 4 miles from the nearest settlement did not receive visitors after dusk. She received warnings, demands, men who thought distance made them bold. She put one eye to the tiny hole drilled through the pine door. A stranger stood on her porch in a dark coat gone almost black with rain. Tall, lean, hat brim low, one hand hanging empty at his side, the other kept well away from the walnut grip of the revolver at his hip. He was being careful, the way dangerous men are careful when they want you to notice it. But Lin Yu's breath snagged for a different reason. Behind him sat a narrow buckboard, one miserable mule, and under a patched oilcloth a little girl no older than 8, asleep with her cheek against a rolled blanket. Lin Yu lifted the bar, cracked the door, and shoved the rifle barrel through the gap until it rested at the center of the stranger's chest. "I do not open my door for trouble," she said. His hands rose at once, calmly, not insulted, not afraid enough. His eyes were a pale gray under the rain-dark brim. "Then we agree already," he said. His voice was rough and low, like stone dragged across wood. "I was told in Red Bluff you might pay for a hunter." Red Bluff, of course. The town that watched her buy flour and lamp oil with the same interest other people reserved for a hanging. They knew a catamount had taken 2 hens, then a milk goat, and circled her corral twice more in the last 10 days. They knew winter had left her lean. They knew a woman alone was easiest to discuss when she was not there to hear it. "The town talks too much," Lin Yu said. A flicker passed across his mouth. Not a smile. Something thinner. "It does." The little girl stirred in the wagon and coughed in her sleep. That sound changed everything. No decent man dragged a child through mountain rain unless every other door had already shut on him. Lin Yu looked back at the stranger. Mud pasted his trouser legs to his shins. One boot had split near the sole. The revolver at his hip was worn hard, not polished for show. Whatever road had brought him here, it had taken its payment. "My husband's rifle is inside," she said. "If you hunt my cat, you use that. Your revolver stays with the mule." It was a test built to offend. A proud man would refuse before she finished the sentence. He hesitated only long enough to prove he was proud after all. Then he nodded once. "Fair." "The child?" "My daughter, Rose. She keeps quiet." Lin Yu opened the door another foot. The girl comes in by the stove. You sleep in the shed." He did not thank her with words. He turned, lifted the sleeping child from the wagon with a tenderness that did not belong to the gun on his hip, and carried her toward the cabin while the rain drummed harder overhead. That was the first bargain. Lin Yu would later understand that the knock itself had not been the danger. The danger was the decision she made after it. By dawn, the storm had blown east and left the whole hillside smelling of wet sage, pine, and raw earth. The stranger was already awake. Lin Yu watched from the window while steam rose from her teacup. He had kept his word. His revolver belt lay wrapped in oilcloth on the wagon seat. Her husband Spencer rested in his hands now, and he carried it with the ease of a man who had spent too many years needing one. Rose sat on the porch with a heel of bread and both hands around a tin cup, small and grave and too practiced at being no trouble. The proof they were too late waited at the corral. The latch hung broken. Boards were clawed to splinters. Blood marked the trampled dirt, then vanished into drag lines leading toward the rim rock north of the spring. Her last goat. Lin Yu stared at the empty pen until anger burned cleaner than grief. That goat was milk, breeding, meat, and trade. On a frontier ledger, one carcass was the difference between scraping through winter and failing in public for everybody in Red Bluff to enjoy. "The tracks go toward Devil's Cut," she said. The stranger checked the rifle chamber and looked up. "Then that's where we go." "We?" she repeated. His eyes shifted toward Rose. Lin Yu had already solved that. She knelt in front of the girl, showed her how to drop the heavy bar across the cabin door from the inside, and placed a kettle, biscuits, and a loaded whistle on the table. Rose listened without blinking, and nodded before Lin Yu finished speaking. It was the obedience of a child who had lived too close to fear. The climb toward Devil's Cut took them through wet timber, dark basalt shelves, and game trails barely wider than a boot. The stranger moved like a man trained by danger itself, every step economical, every glance used. But Lin Yu knew the land in ways he could not. She knew which gullies held cold air, where the shale slid underfoot, which ravens circled fresh death, and how the wind turned treacherous when the ravine narrowed. He was the hunter. She was the reason he could find the thing. They spoke little. They did not need much. A rhythm formed between them before noon. He read sign in the mud and brush. She cut distance by steering them through hidden deer paths her husband had shown her in their first year on the claim. They found the cat in a stone wash below the black cliffs. It was bigger than she had imagined, shoulders rolling under tawny muscle, muzzle red with goat blood. It fed with its back half turned to them, tail twitching once, twice in the weeds. The stranger lowered himself behind a boulder and raised the Spencer. His breathing went quiet, deliberate, controlled. He waited for the shoulder line to open. Then the wind betrayed them. The cat's head snapped up, yellow eyes fixed straight through the brush. It came off the ground like something launched. The first shot tore across the ravine and hit high in the ribs, but not enough. The cat hit a rock ledge, rebounded, and came lower, faster, all teeth, muscle, and fury. The stranger worked the lever. Once. Jammed. Lin Yu did not think. She snatched up a dead pine branch, slammed it against the boulder, and shouted with every ounce of air in her lungs. The sound sliced sideways through the wash. The cat twisted toward her, changing its line by a single violent yard. That yard saved her life. The stranger tore the stuck casing free, shouldered the rifle again, and fired at nearly point-blank range. The bullet hit square in the throat. The cat collapsed in a rolling explosion of claws, dust, and blood, skidding through shale until it stopped so close Lin Yu could smell the hot wildness of it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the stranger lowered the rifle and looked at her. Not shocked, not grateful, but reassessing her completely. "That was a bad idea," he said. "Yes," Lin Yu answered, breath ragged. "But it worked." A thin line appeared beside his mouth, the nearest thing to a smile she had yet seen. It did. They dragged the carcass back in stages, took what hide and meat they could, and reached the homestead after dark with blood on their sleeves and new knowledge in their bones. He knew now she would not fold under fear. She knew now his calm was not theater. It was skill so worn into him it had become part of how he breathed. The next day they drove to Red Bluff for salt, cartridges, and lamp oil. If the mountain had made them partners, town intended to punish them for it. Red Bluff was one muddy street, 3 false front buildings, a smithy, a telegraph office, and enough contempt to fill a church. Men on porches stopped talking when Lin Yu stepped off the wagon. Women in the mercantile looked at her only after she passed. She had survived that gaze for 3 years. What she had not yet survived was what came next. Amos Creed intercepted them outside the store. He owned the spread bordering her spring and had been trying to pry her off the claim since the day her husband was buried. Thick-necked, red-faced, always dressed half a dollar finer than an honest cattleman could afford. Creed smiled the way dogs show teeth. "Well, now," he said loudly, looking Lin Yu over as if she were livestock. "Looks like the China woman found herself a bodyguard." The boardwalk went still. Lin Yu felt the old heat rise behind her ribs. Not fear exactly. Something harder. The familiar rage of being treated like something weak enough to purchase. The stranger stepped half a pace forward. Not enough to start a fight, enough to end one if it came. "She asked for a hunter," he said. Creed spat tobacco juice off the boards. "And what are you? Some washed-out pistol hand with a bastard wagon and a sob story?" The stranger's face did not change. "The cat that's been feeding off these hills is dead," he said. "Big female. Mean. Took her in Devil's Cut yesterday." Creed's smile thinned. The stranger tilted his head as if discussing weather. "If Red Bluff's got anything meaner walking upright, I can make time." No one laughed. That was the power of it. The threat was quiet enough to sound like fact. Creed looked from the stranger to Lin Yue and understood, maybe for the first time, that she was no longer standing alone in the place where he preferred her to stand. He muttered something foul under his breath and pushed past them. But Lin Yue saw one thing before he turned away. Satisfaction. Just a flicker of it. Not the look of a man who had lost ground. The look of a man who had already sent word somewhere. That evening, after Rose had fallen asleep under Lin Yue's quilt and the lamps had burned low, she and the stranger sat on the porch listening to the creek move through the dark. "You still have no name," Lin Yue said. He rolled a small silver object between thumb and forefinger for several seconds before answering. "A name can get people killed." She said nothing. At last he opened his hand. It was a locket, fire-blackened along one edge. Inside sat two tiny photographs, a woman with serious eyes and a little girl younger than Rose. "My wife was named Anna," he said. "Rose was 6 when the barn burned." The night seemed to tighten around them. He told it plainly, which made it land harder. He had once farmed a narrow place in eastern Oregon. A freight baron named Vernon Hale wanted the route cutting through his land. Not part of it, all of it. When the papers and the sheriff failed to move him, fire did the work. His wife died inside. He got Rose out through the back smoke. Hale's men thought father and daughter burned with the place. He had spent the last year making sure the mistake held. Lin Yue looked at the black edge of the locket and understood his silence all at once. It was not mystery for effect. It was a grave he carried around in his coat pocket. "And Amos Creed?" she asked. "The brand on his saddle horse belongs to Hale's Freight Company," he said. "I saw it in town. Creed recognized me before he understood where from. By now he's remembered." The truth moved through her slowly, and then all at once. The cat. The humiliation in town. The hostile glances. None of it was the real danger. The real danger had ridden in quietly under her own roof, with a child in his arms and a dead life behind him. "There is a telegraph key in Red Bluff," Lin Yue said. He nodded. "And Hale has money enough to make it useful." He should have left the next morning. That was the sensible answer. If he took the girl and vanished south, Hale's men might pass over her claim and keep going. Lin Yue could return to her old life of hard work, low voices, and lonely meals. Safe enough, empty enough. Instead, she looked through the open doorway at Rose, asleep by the stove, one hand curled under her cheek. Then she looked at the man beside her, This careful, dangerous stranger who had stood between her and Amos Creed without asking what it might cost him. She made the worst safe decision of her life. "You and the girls sleep inside tonight," she said. "Tomorrow we start making this place difficult." He turned toward her fully then, gray eyes searching for hesitation and finding none. "They will kill whoever stands near me." Lin Yue held his gaze. Then they should have chosen a different porch. By the first hard frost, the homestead no longer looked like a widow's last fragile claim. It looked like a place with teeth. Brush had been cut back from the cabin walls to open clear sight lines. A firing slit hid beneath the barn loft. The root cellar door had been reinforced. Flat stones, hauled one brutal load at a time, formed a knee-high wall around the garden and spring path. Spare cartridges sat sealed in waxed tins beneath the table. Even the hen house had been moved to force any approach across exposed ground. But the strangest part was not the fortification. It was the life growing inside it. Rose laughed now, not often, not loudly, but enough to prove she remembered how. Lin Yue taught her written characters in the evening and English words after supper. The stranger, still unnamed because some habits die slowly, split wood, traded venison to a survey crew 2 ridges east, and repaired the broken flume that fed Lin Yue's small orchard. Silver began to collect again in the tea tin beneath the floorboard. Not much. Enough. Sometimes, at dusk, Lin Yue would catch herself watching him plane a board, or lift water buckets, or kneel to show Rose how to whittle cedar safely, and she would feel the dangerous pull of imagining a future before that future had earned the right to exist. Danger arrived on a blue cold afternoon in November. 3 riders came out of the cottonwoods below the spring. Amos Creed in front, 2 strangers behind him. Hard faces, better rifles, men hired not to posture, but to finish. Creed reined up within shouting distance of the cabin and grinned as if he had ridden there to collect a debt. "No reason to make this ugly," he called. "Hale wants the man and the girl, not the widow." Lin Yue stood behind the cabin window, with the Spencer braced against the sill. Rose crouched in the root cellar with blankets, water, and strict instructions not to move unless called. In the barn loft, the stranger waited behind the firing slit they had cut together. "This is my claim," Lin Yue shouted back. "Turn around." Creed laughed. "Not any more. County says your taxes lapsed. Paper changed hands this morning." A lie. A legal lie, but a lie all the same. Lin Yue had paid in person, which meant Creed had come for the land the way men like Creed always came for it. First with paper, then with force. The 2 hired gunmen split wide exactly as the stranger had predicted they would. One toward the orchard rows, one toward the stable side. Lin Yue did not fire first. She waited. The man moving through the orchard reached the low stone wall and crouched, thinking the trees concealed him. That was when the shot cracked from the barn loft. He dropped with a scream, rifle flying from his hands into the frost. The second man snapped toward the barn and fired too quickly. His muzzle flash gave him away. Lin Yue put a round through the water barrel beside him. The barrel exploded. Cold water and splintered staves flew outward, spooking his horse and throwing him sideways into the open. The second shot from the barn took him through the shoulder. Everything changed at once. Creed, who had expected fear and found planning instead, yanked his pistol and drove his horse straight for the porch in blind panic. It was the kind of charge desperate men make when they realize other people have been thinking ahead of them. The cabin door opened. The stranger stepped out onto the porch with his rifle leveled and absolute stillness in his posture. He did not look like a drifter now. He looked like a verdict. "Stop," he said. Creed did. The horse slid, snorting, 10 yards from the steps. For the first time since Lin Yue had met him, the stranger offered the world his full face without flinching from what might come after. "Go back to Vernon Hale," he said, voice flat and carrying. "Tell him Jonah Mercer is not dead. Tell him the next men he sends won't ride home." There it was, a name pulled back out of ash. Creed's bravado drained so fast it was almost pitiful. 2 wounded men in the frost, at Lin Yu steady behind the window, at Jonah Mercer standing on the porch he had helped fortify, and understood the arithmetic had turned against him. He wheeled his horse and ran. Jonah and Lin Yu disarmed the fallen men, bound their wounds tightly enough to keep them alive, and sent them limping back toward Red Bluff before dark, with Hale's message bleeding through their bandages. No one came again. Winter passed. Then spring returned in the hard, bright way it does in the high country, all rushing meltwater and sudden green. The orchard buds held. The hens laid again. Rose's handwriting grew steadier. Red Bluff, which had once spoken of Lin Yu as though she were a temporary inconvenience, began speaking of the cabin above the creek in a different tone entirely. Respect often arrives wearing the same boots fear wore first. By May, Jonah Mercer's name was no longer something hidden between clenched teeth. He mended fence in daylight. He laughed sometimes. Lin Yu found she liked the sound more than she had prepared herself to. One afternoon a soft rain began to fall, whispering through the orchard leaves and darkening the porch boards. There was a knock at the door. Lin Yu crossed the room without reaching for a rifle. When she opened it, the Methodist circuit preacher stood there with a pie dish wrapped in cloth and rain beating on the brim of his hat. "Thought you folks might want something warm," he said. Behind Lin Yu, Rose was reading aloud by the stove, while Jonah shaved a cedar toy with slow, careful strokes. The room smelled of broth, wet earth, and apple peel. Lin Yu took the pie and felt something inside her settle at last. The sound that had once meant threat had become something else. Not safety exactly. Frontier life never promised that. Something better. Belonging, earned the hard way. A home defended until even the world outside had to acknowledge it. She had learned that 4 walls alone did not make a shelter. A shelter was a line drawn in the dirt, and the people who chose to hold it with you. And sometimes the most dangerous man to arrive at your door was the very one who taught the world to knock gently after that.